Now, happy to answer or dodge any question you like.
Thank you. Would you be in favor, perhaps you could squeeze it in on your second day in office, that you would consider some kind of a federal regulation that deems that all exemptions and subsidies are illegal?
Sir, thank you for that question. Let me first off say thank you for serving this nation. Thank you for staying. And absolutely, yes, I think we have far too much cronyism in Washington. You know, last year I wrote a book called A Time for Truth. And in that book, I talk a lot about what I call the Washington cartel, which is career politicians in both parties that get in bed with lobbyists and special interests. And they play the game of picking winners and losers. And we see this cronyism, we see this corporate welfare that comes out of Washington. And it's a big part of the reason why our national debt has gone from $10 trillion to $18 trillion. And in my view, there should be no mandates, no subsidies. There should be a level playing field, and Washington shouldn't be in the business of pitting one set of Americans against another set of Americans.
Morning, Senator.
Good morning.
I got out of the Marine Corps in June, and while I was in, I saw firsthand millions and millions of dollars of unwisely spent money, tons of waste. I know amongst Republicans it's not very popular to cut defense spending. I mean, that does fall into the category of defense spending. Do you believe that we can cut defense spending while also increasing the strength of our defense?
Well, sir, let me say the same thing I said a minute ago. Thank you for serving as well. Thank you. And I gotta say, your little one there is absolutely adorable. What's her name?
Autumn.
Autumn. Well, you have the same blessing I have. I've got 2 little girls, and I've said many times, thank God they look like their mom. Proof that God is a benevolent God. So, look, your question is a very important one. Listen, of course there's waste in the military. In any large organization, there's waste. If you look at the Pentagon hasn't been audited for years. They're unable even to audit the Pentagon, the basic first financial step you do to any major operation. And we need to bring real scrutiny. One of the problems at the Pentagon we've seen is a growth of what I would call middle management. A growth of the folks at the Pentagon, the managers and everything, and at the same time a weakening of the ability of the war fighters to carry out their job. Now, we need to target that waste. And I'll give you an example of it. About a year and a half ago, we had a hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee. And I asked the Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of Defense, at the time they were proposing cutting our troop size, cutting our ability to defend this country, and I asked about, the Pentagon has about $7 billion in its alternative fuels program. One of them is algae fuel for ships. And they decided they want to run ships on algae, and that costs about $120 million more than it would have been just to use ordinary gasoline. And I said, well, do you think perhaps instead of spending $120 million extra on gasoline, we could use it to take care of our troops and pay them more and provide for them? A similar example, the Air Force set up in Alaska a wind farm. Unfortunately, the place they set it up, the wind doesn't blow, so they had to take it down because it didn't work. It spent $15 million on it. So yes, there is definitely waste. And when I asked the Secretary of Defense, what would you say about that? He said, yeah, I would say that's a luxury. And I said, well, at the time when you're talking about cutting our military to the bone, did it occur to you to maybe cut the luxuries first? The answer was no, that didn't occur to us. So you're absolutely right, but let me put it in the broader context. Even though there's waste and we need to get rid of it and we need to make it more efficient, it is critical that we rebuild the military. If you look at our overall ability to defend ourselves, you know, this past Saturday was the 25th anniversary of the beginning of Desert Storm. In 1991, when Desert Storm began, we had about 8,000 planes. Today we have about 4,000. In 1991, we had 529 ships. Today we have 272. In 1991, our Army had over a third as many soldiers as we have right now. And the sad reality is the world has gotten much, much more dangerous in the last 25 years. And so the pattern that I intend to follow, you know, we've seen this before, a degraded military, a dangerous world, a stagnant economy. In 1981, when Reagan came into office, that's exactly what he found. And what he did is he passed tax reform and regulatory reform. He took the boots of the federal government off the backs of the necks of small businesses. That prompted incredible economic growth. He rebuilt, he unleashed the incredible engine of the American free enterprise system. That in turn provided the revenue to rebuild the military. And we rebuilt the military and won the Cold War by bankrupting the Soviet Union. I intend to do the same thing and defeat radical Islamic terrorism by unleashing our economy to rebuild the military to keep this country safe.
What are your thoughts on federal laws for homeschooling?
A great question. What are my thoughts on federal law for homeschooling? Let me say a couple of things. Number one, I think homeschooling is fantastic. I have been a huge advocate of homeschooling and defender. I think it is a fundamental right of every parent to educate their children. And I thank any parent who makes the investment of time and love to homeschool your kids. Always fight to protect the rights of homeschoolers. But at the same time, when it comes to education, I think education decisions should be made at the state and local level and not in Washington. That's why we should abolish the Department of Education. I trust the people of New Hampshire much better to make the determination about what are the right rules for education here than any bureaucrat in the bowels of the Department of Education in Washington. Yes, sir.
Well, welcome to Exeter, Senator.
Thank you.
Just would like to point out a little bit of history. Abraham Lincoln gave a speech right where you are standing here a few years back.
Oh, holy cow. Wow.
But I'd like to implore you to reconsider your position on ethanol. Ethanol is a policy used in the gasoline that was made back during, around Jimmy Carter's administration, and we've long gone past where we need that. We've had a shale revolution in oil and gas production. And, ethanol, the production of ethanol uses almost as much petroleum. In other words, you've got all the fertilizers.
Can I ask you something, sir?
Sure.
What do you understand to be my position on ethanol?
I think you were originally opposed to it, but then you changed it.
So let me answer your question, because I think you're going to be happy with my answer. So let me get to it. My position has not changed one iota. Which is my view on energy, and we talked about it just a minute ago, is there should be no mandates, no subsidies whatsoever for any energy source, whether ethanol or oil and gas or anything else. And I'll tell a story. So right now, I am the only major candidate in Iowa who is taking that position. Right now, my opponents all attacking me. And they're all promising, just yesterday, Donald Trump promised not only to protect the ethanol mandate, but to expand it, to have the federal government do even more picking winners and losers by mandating ethanol be a larger part of the marketplace. So I'm getting hit literally with millions of dollars of attacks on exactly this issue. Let me tell you a story, and this is good for the young people to give you a sense of politics. A number of months ago, I was in Iowa at an ag summit. About 1,000 farmers, 1,000 people active in the ethanol industry. We talked about all sorts of agriculture issues, and one of the questions was the ethanol mandate. And really, the purpose of the summit was to get every candidate there to kiss the ring of the ethanol mandate. And every candidate there, including several who had opposed the mandate in the past, did a 180 flip and said, I am for ethanol forever. Except me. And what I told folks there is I said, listen, I support ethanol. I support every fuel source. We ought to pursue all of the above. God has blessed America with rich and abundant energy resources. But it shouldn't be Washington picking winners and losers. That's why I filed legislation to phase out the ethanol mandate over 5 years. Now, listen, when I said that, I didn't know if they would boo and throw tomatoes. You know, that's like coming up to New Hampshire saying, I'm for the Broncos. It's just not a safe course of action. I'm not actually for the Broncos, just to be clear. That was a hypothetical. Go Patriots. Know if they throw rotten tomatoes at me or what. And actually I went on, I said, look, I understand a lot of people here would rather I said something different. That you'd rather I say, I'm for the ethanol mandate forever and ever, amen. But every one of us has seen politicians that tell one group one thing and tell another group another thing. And we know what happens. They go to Washington and they don't do what they say. And I said, with me, what I've tried to do in office has been two things. Number one, tell the truth. And number two, do what I said I would do. Now, what I also tell folks, and I don't care very much about ethanol, I said, you know, there's a reason the lobbyists and the Democrats want you focused on the ethanol mandate. Because it keeps Iowa dependent on Washington. It keeps you coming back every year and paying the lobbyists so that they get rich. Because it's Washington politicians setting the rules. So although I would get rid of all the mandates and have a level playing field, there's a much more important barrier for ethanol than the mandate. And it's what's called the EPA blend wall, where the EPA prohibits selling gasoline with higher ethanol mixes. And I've pledged I'm going to get rid of that rule, which means we'll let the marketplace decide. If ethanol competes in the marketplace and expands its market share, you can end up with a bigger share of the market. But it's not going to be based on a mandate. It's going to be based on you and the market operating on a on a fair and level playing field, which is how it's supposed to work.
About your father really resonated with me because my mother came from Ukraine, and she came from Ukraine not knowing any English with one suitcase between her and her parents, and now she's living the American dream. And so my question for you is, what are your thoughts on supporting legal immigration, and also what are your thoughts on decreasing illegal immigration?
Okay, terrific question. Thank you for sharing your mom's story. And I will say one experience that is particularly valuable when you're an immigrant or the child of an immigrant. Particularly coming from a country where freedom was not widespread, is that it makes you appreciate just how incredibly precious and fragile our freedom is. I mean, it's one of the things, you know, when I was growing up, my cousin Bibi, she's 5 years older than I am, and she's the daughter of my tia Sonia, who's my dad's kid sister. So my father fought with Castro in the revolution. My aunt, who was there after Castro took over, fought against Castro in the counter-revolution. And my aunt likewise was imprisoned and tortured, although by the other side of the war. And Bibi and I used to sit on the floor at the feet of my dad and my Tia Sonia and listen to stories about fighting for freedom. And it is an amazing thing. It is a real blessing to be the child of an immigrant who fled oppression, because it makes so personal and real what the stakes are that we're fighting. Now, your question on immigration is a very good one. And listen, I think there's a lot of bipartisan agreement outside of Washington on immigration. I think outside of Washington there is overwhelming bipartisan agreement that we have got to secure the border and stop illegal immigration. And I think there is also considerable bipartisan agreement outside of Washington that we should welcome and celebrate legal immigrants, those who follow the rules and come here seeking immigration. You know, and I have to say, sometimes the reporters find this a confusing distinction. And I try to make it easy for them. It's like, look, legal, good. Illegal, bad. You know, I'm reminded of Sonny Bono, who used to be a member of Congress, and they asked Sonny Bono, they said, "What's your views on illegal immigration?" And he said, "Well, it's illegal, isn't it?" So, and by the way, we hear all the time that we can't stop illegal immigration. It's complete nonsense. If you go to our website, which is tedcruz.org, we have laid out a very, very detailed immigration plan. 11 pages, single space, chapter and verse, exactly what we'll do. I designed it hand in hand with Senator Jeff Sessions and Congressman Steve King, perhaps the two strongest advocates and champions of securing the border and stopping illegal immigration. And let me tell you what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is build a wall. You know, existing federal law mandates 700 miles of reinforced fencing. You know how many miles the Obama administration is allowed to be built? 36. They're just ignoring existing federal law. As president, I will follow the law and we will build the wall. We'll triple the border patrol. We'll increase fourfold the fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft so you have technology to monitor any attempted incursion and send the boots on the ground to where it's happening. We'll put in place a strong E-Verify system so that nobody can get a job without proving they're here legally. We'll put in place a biometric exit-entry system on visas, because right now 40% of illegal immigration doesn't come over the border illegally, they come legally and just overstay their visas. Again, existing federal law mandates that today. The Obama administration just refuses to do it. I will follow that law. And we will end sanctuary cities, and let me tell you how. There are right now about 360 jurisdictions in this country that are sanctuary jurisdictions that defy federal immigration law. Every single one of them is going to find their federal taxpayer dollars cut off. And we will end welfare for those here illegally. The next time you hear someone in the media saying there's no way to secure the border, a wall won't work, you know, they do the line, if you build a 10-foot wall, they build an 11-foot ladder. It's complete nonsense. You want to see how a wall can work? Go to Israel. Israel, they have built a wall and they monitor it because they're Hamas terrorists on the other side. They don't want them to cross in, and they don't cross in. We know how to do this. We have the tools, and actually existing federal law provides an awful lot of the tools we need. What is missing is the political will. What is missing is right now far too many, all of the Democrats and far too many Republicans don't want to get it done. The difference is, I give you my word. As president, I will secure the border and we will end illegal immigration. Yes, sir, and then we'll do one question after this. Go ahead.
Just in addition to her question, does that mean you would terminate the deferred action for childhood arrivals?
Yes. And let's talk about that for a second. The question was, would I terminate Obama's executive amnesty? And listen, what Obama has done with amnesty is really quite striking. Several years ago, a group of activists asked him, will you unilaterally decree amnesty for those here illegally? And Obama said, I don't have the constitutional authority to do that. That is against federal immigration law. In fact, Obama continued, he said, I am not an emperor. Those are his words, not mine. I am not an emperor. Just a few months later, partisan politics intervened, and suddenly he did the very thing that he had just said he had no constitutional authority to do. I guess he became an emperor. And I believe in rule of law. I have spent virtually my entire life fighting to defend the Constitution, fighting to defend the Bill of Rights. If you've got a president that picks and chooses which laws to follow and which laws to ignore, you no longer have a president. And that is profoundly dangerous. You know, the gentleman mentioned that Lincoln spoke on this stage, which really kind of takes your breath away. But if you look at the history of our country, you look before Lincoln to the framers. Thomas Jefferson referred to the Constitution as chains that bind the mischief of government. If you have a president that behaves as an emperor, saying, this law I'll ignore, this law I'll ignore, we lose that protection to our liberty. So I intend to follow the law, and that's exactly what I'll do as president. Last question.
I love what you stand for, and you got my vote, but I'm already a conservative. The issue is, how do you reach out to the low information voters, and people who think that Democrats are going to give everything for free, and they're going to take it for the rich? Okay.
Yeah. So it is a great question. For those who couldn't hear it, the gentleman said, I'm already supporting you, I'm already voting for you, and I will say you are wise and have tremendous judgment. I can tell that from here. But he said, how do you reach out to others, and in particular low information voters, that the Democrats say, as they always do, we'll give you free stuff. And free stuff sometimes in a campaign works pretty well. Now, the answer is twofold. Number one, we speak the truth with a smile. You know, Democrats will offer free stuff. Bernie Sanders is saying free college, free houses, free cars, a chicken in every pot. In Colorado, pot for every voter. You know, I mean, whatever it is, he'll do it. But the first rule of economics is Tanstall. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Margaret Thatcher put it differently. She said the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. And everything that government gives to the people, it must first take from the people. So in the world, you know, but we've got to speak the truth. So for example, I can't wait to stand on that debate stage next to Hillary Clinton. And how do we win? We don't do what the Washington consultants tell us every time. They always say the way you win is you run to the middle. You run to the mushy middle. You blur the distinctions. You run as Democrat light. And every time we do that, we lose. You know, it's an interesting theory, but as they say in the tech world, this has been beta tested. It doesn't work. And what's abundantly clear, if we nominate another candidate in the mold of a Bob Dole, or a John McCain, or a Mitt Romney, all of whom are good, honorable, decent men, they love their country, but what they did didn't work. We got to do something different. I think the way we win, I think 2016 is like 1980. I think we win by following Reagan's admonition to paint in bold colors, not pale pastels. So on that debate stage, standing with Hillary, we win by saying, if you vote for Hillary Clinton, Iran will get nuclear weapons. If you vote for me, the Ayatollah Khamenei will never have nuclear weapons. If you vote for Hillary Clinton, Obamacare will remain a permanent feature of our economy, taking away jobs, driving up your health care premiums. If you vote for me, we will repeal every word of Obamacare. If you vote for Hillary Clinton, 12 million people here illegally will get amnesty, taking away jobs and driving down wages for millions of working men and women. If you vote for me, there will be no amnesty. We will secure the border and we will end illegal immigration. That's how we win with a clear contrast. But then a second thing, telling the truth with a smile. But number two, style matters. Look, would it kill Republicans to crack a joke? Actually, some of them I think it might. You know, have a little fun for Pete's sake. You know, don't... All right, we put out a meme online. Reaganomics. You start a business in your parents' garage. Obamanomics. You move into your parents' garage. I'll give you another example. Some time ago, I was out in California. And the week before I arrived, these posters began appearing all over town. They were posters of my head on a shirtless body.
Right here.
That was ripped and covered in tattoos. A giant eagle across my chest. 2 6-shooters on my abs, which were a perfect 8-pack. Winston Churchill on my right bicep, which was massive. A cigarette dangling out of my mouth, and above it the legend, blacklisted and loving it. Now, we had nothing to do with these posters. It was a local street artist who just put them up on his own, but we decided, all right, let's have some fun with it. So we put up a post on Facebook that said, for whatever reason, these posters have begun appearing all over Hollywood. I gotta say, I noticed a glaring error. I don't smoke cigarettes. And that's how we communicate and connect with people, as we connect directly with them, telling the truth, but having fun and energizing. All right, let me make the final point to wrap up. If y'all agree with me that the stakes have never been higher, that it's now or never, that we are standing at the edge of a cliff, and if we keep going on the current path we're on, another 4 or 8 more years, we risk doing permanent damage to the greatest country in the history of the world. If you agree with me, then I want to ask each of you to do 3 things. Number 1, join us. Commit today to come out and vote in the New Hampshire Republican primary. Stand with us. If we stand united, we win. Number 2, volunteer. Sign up to be a precinct leader. Sign up to be a county leader. Agree today to pick up the phone and call your mom. It's actually a good idea to call your mom anyway. Call your sister, call your son or your next door neighbor, or your college roommate or your business partner, and say, this election matters. Matters to me and my future. Matters to my... I'm not suggesting voter fraud, but if everyone here gets 9 other people to show up and vote in the New Hampshire Republican primary, you will have just voted 10 times. And let me say also to everyone who is under 18 right now, if you get 10 people to show up, you will have voted 10 times, even though you can't yet vote yourself. That's how we do it. And then the third thing I want to ask is that you pray. That everyone here commit each day between now and Election Day to pray for our country. To spend just 1 minute a day. When you wake up in the morning, when you're shaving, when you're having lunch, when you're putting your kids down to sleep, when you're lying down in bed at the end of the day. To spend just 1 minute saying, Father God, please continue this awakening that is spreading the country. Pull this country back from the abyss. We're standing on the promises of 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear their prayer, and will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. Here's a bit of history that our friends in the media will never tell. In January 1981, when Ronald Reagan took the oath of office, his left hand was resting on 2 Chronicles 7:14. A very real and concrete manifestation of that promise from the Word of God. This country has faced enormous challenges before. We have been at the abyss before, and we have risen up as one to pull back. We have done it before, and I tell you, we can do it again. Thank you.
Croc TV.